Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Takahashi. Thanks for watching my YouTube channel. The main objective of this channel is for me to read news all over the world. It is in English and Japanese, interpret the news and talk about the news, and give my investment advice based on my interpretations. My background is mostly on Wall Street, finance, or being an entrepreneur. I started investing when I was 12, joined Wall Street when I was 19 as an intern, joined the world of hedge funds when I was 22, created my own hedge fund when I was 26, and sold my stake in that same hedge fund when I was 30 years old. Almost all my personal finances have been based solely on investment performance, and I have not earned a salary since I was 23. That's a quick synopsis for those who are new to this channel. Today what I want to talk about is a piece of news that I've been reading for the last 1 or 2 days, and I have to make a comment because I just think it's absolutely ridiculous. Creating a digital currency for government institutions like central banks. Now, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, has been talking about this. The World Bank has been talking about this. The Asia Development Bank has been talking about this. These are all government institutions, that are basically controlled by the government, even though they're supposed to be not controlled and independent. They are sort of controlled. Asia Development Bank has a strong influence from Japan and China. IMF, World Bank also have very strong influences from US and Europe. And now we're having seen dialogue about central banks creating their own currency, perhaps in retaliation to Facebook trying to create its own currency called the Libra. I think this is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I did buy some Bitcoin back in the day and I sold it, but that's a story for another day. Digital currency itself, unless the technology is extremely secure, it's difficult to believe for me longer term, just because the supply can be increased, maybe not in that single currency, but the fact that other institutions can create new currencies at any time. The whole idea of a currency itself is that there's supposed to be limited supply, but then when you have new institutions coming in with new technologies creating new currencies all the time, that begs the question anymore as to what is the definition of a currency. So that itself is a problem. But now we have the central bank, which we're talking about the Japanese central bank, American central bank, ECB, also in the UK, talking about creating either a joint digital currency or their own digital currencies, which is just absurd. Since 2008, these central banks, primarily the US, but have been actually not just the US, almost all these central banks around the world have been engaged in what's called QE, a type of monetary policy easing. They're just printing and printing and printing money to try and get out of the debt crisis after the Lehman crash in 2008. And they're just creating money out of thin air, basically. This is the definition of debt monetization, which you guys can Google. This is catastrophic long-term for the currency. I do not really trust the currencies longer term for any of these countries where the central bank is just printing money out of thin air, because it destroys the whole concept of what a currency is. But now the central banks have taken it a step further and talking about creating their own digital currency. Japan is the worst culprit, in my opinion. Why? There are 200 countries in the world, roughly 197. Out of these countries, if you measure the government debt, so public debt, as a percentage of GDP, because you can't just measure debt. I mean, each country has, their various sizes in their economy. So you have to look at debt based on the income, of course, whether it's a government, a company, or a person. So how important is the debt? Well, it's based on the income. So debt to GDP is the most important way to look at a country's debt situation. Out of the 200 countries, public debt to GDP, Japan is number 1, highest in the world. Not some emerging market, not some country that's been in trouble and that needs a bailout, blah, blah, blah. Japan. And they are ahead by far. Over 250% debt to GDP ratio. If you look at who's number 2, number 3, it's like 150%. There's a huge difference. So Japan is on a different level in terms of the negligence, especially I'm talking about the central bank, the Japanese central bank, the BOJ. And now the BOJ talking about, just even the talk of a digital currency, when they've been already engaged in just pure debt monetization, digital currency is just another way for the central bank, I'm sorry to say, to be able to print money so that the government can find other effective ways of borrowing, because the government's in huge trouble and they have a ton of debt. And by printing new currencies, whether it's the yen or it's a new digital currency, they're just empowering themselves and giving themselves ammunition to dig themselves out of a hole, or worse, borrow more from the people, which is what has been happening for the last 20 or 30 some years in Japan. Thanks for watching my video today. Please, I welcome any comments, any requests. Also, please subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to speaking again. Thank you and good night.